world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Wednesday, November 26th, as you are listening to this, and it is the day before Thanksgiving. So if you are out traveling, I hope you have a safe trip to wherever you are going for the holiday. I hope you enjoy the holiday. And if you're listening to me while you are driving, well, thank you for taking me along with you. I know you could pick probably any podcast to listen to while you are out traveling, but I'm glad you chose mine. Now, let's get into it. Of course, we've got a lot to talk about when it comes to news and politics, even though it's the lead up to a holiday. There's always shit to talk about. This administration is good at keeping things going and not being boring. I miss boring politics. I miss back when, the biggest scandal in politics was, oh my God, Barack Obama wore a tan-colored suit, and how awful that was. Of course, he could have worn a regular suit and they would have found a reason to complain. But when that was the worst scandal we had, that was pretty mild. Going back even farther, with what Bill Clinton did in the Oval Office with Monica Lewinsky, that still was it wasn't as horrible as anything we're seeing now. They treated it as such, but we didn't have nearly the problems back in those days politically than we do now. Politics were boring, and I miss boring politics. Sure, it would make doing what I do a lot harder, but I would prefer that over these interesting times we are currently in. Now, yesterday, Donald Trump did the official turkey pardon that they do yearly for Thanksgiving. Every year the president pardons a couple of turkeys, says, okay, I'm going to pardon you and you're not going to be eaten this year or whatever. It's a photo op and it's kind of silly. Normally I wouldn't care, because it's just one of those weird traditions that we do, and it doesn't really matter to, it does to some people, but it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter overall. It's just a quirky tradition. But of course, Donald Trump never being the one to let somebody or something else take the limelight, even when he is doing this turkey pardon, he had to make it a chance to go on the attack. And as we've been talking about his declining health and everything else, what did he take the opportunity to do? Well, he turned it on Joe Biden, talking about how last year Joe Biden's pardons of the turkeys were invalid because they used an auto pen. Well, first of all, like I said, it's a quirky little tradition, right? The turkeys aren't really accused of any crimes. This isn't an official presidential pardon as far as, anything other than, hey, you know what? By designation of the president, we're not going to eat you, right? It's symbolic in nature, trying to say that Joe Biden didn't have the authority to pardon them, or that the pardons of those turkeys were invalid, just because they have accused Joe Biden of using the auto pen. Doesn't mean anything. But Donald Trump couldn't be bothered to deal with any of the facts. He had to make it an attack point, right? And then he also said, now the two turkeys, they named Gobble and Waddle, which sounds like the names you would come up with if you asked, a kid to come up with the names for the turkeys. But he said he almost called them Chuck and Nancy, but he couldn't see himself ever pardoning those two. going again after two of his political opponents, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Now, in Donald Trump's mind, Schumer and Pelosi are, hardened criminals, and they deserve to be punished. But for what crime? Opposing Donald Trump. That's their big crime. And Donald Trump thinks anybody who opposes him should go to jail, and that is ridiculous. Um, and so he does this turkey pardon thing, and like I said, as he's turning it on Joe Biden, it just reminds us about his own health. Now, if you follow the Rational Boomer, you know the guy I'm going to talk about. One of his guests is Ed, and Ed comes on quite frequently, and Ed said way back when that he didn't think and Donald Trump would make it to Thanksgiving. Well, Thanksgiving's tomorrow. And if this comes up and it happens in the next day or so, not that I'm advocating for something bad necessarily to happen to Donald Trump, um, but as I believe it was Mark Twain said, I'll never advocate for somebody's death, but there are some obituaries I would love to read. Um, he says Donald Trump won't make it to November now, or to Thanksgiving. I think he's going to make it to Thanksgiving, but I don't know about Christmas, and I don't know if he's going to make it to the end of 2026. But his health gets brought up quite a bit, and that's one of the things he was attacking Joe Biden for with this AutoPen story. He brings it back up, but that makes us think about Donald Trump's own health, right? And Donald Trump's health is not in the best of shape. He's been videoed and recorded numerous times where he's not lifting his one leg. I think it's his right leg where it looks like he's dragging it. And I've talked about it before. That is one of the signs that you have had a stroke at some point, is it can throw your balance off where you're not able to lift your foot fully and land with the heel like you're supposed to. So you just kind of drag the foot along. Um, Beyond that, he's got his inability to walk a straight line anymore. He wanders and he looks drunk if you watch him try to walk a straight line. If I walked a straight line or straight-ish line with as big of a weave as he puts through on it, I would be, if I was in public, probably detained and checked for public intox. But he gets a pass because he's the president of the United States. So Donald Trump is not in the best of health, right? We've been talking about this. And he's already been to Walter Reed twice for yearly physicals. Once in, I think it was April, and once in October, which is again reason why people are suspecting his health is not doing that great. And it's going to get worse as the pressure mounts. I mean, when he went to Walter Reed in October, he talked about having an MRI, and he has come out since then, says he has no idea what they were looking at with the MRI, but his images were perfect. How do you know they're perfect if you didn't know what they were looking at? Did they tell you? Or did you just assume? He probably assumed. Or he's just straight lying. Donald Trump likes to lie about his physical condition and his health. If you ask him, he is 6'3", 250 pounds. He's more like 5'10" and about 300, maybe 325, somewhere in there. He is not in great shape. But he would have you believe it. And we don't see him out in public nearly as much as we used to. He's staying more hidden. You see him departing Air Force One. He's taking his time, walking very slow, and that is another sign of potentially having strokes or other forms of issues like dementia, because your balance is off. And he's taking his time going down the stairs, being very careful, very slow, very deliberate. He's even talked about it, how he was been told to take it slow or he might fall. Not exactly the peak of physical condition that he would have us believe that he is, right? So Donald Trump is not in good health. And the added stress of everything going on is going to get to him. Now, what stresses does he have? Well, he's got the fact that his own party is revolting around him. There have been several discharge petitions too, I think, and they're working on a third um, to go around Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. And when it comes to it, his party is not willing to back him nearly as hard as they were before. Look what they did with the Epstein files. And that's another stressor he's got in his life that is going to be haunting him. It took Democrats putting the pressure on Republicans of having to answer a vote on the floor and get their name out in public of saying, yes, I want to keep the Epstein files hidden, so I'm voting no on releasing them. Once Democrats successfully put that pressure on, sure, Donald Trump came out and said, yeah, go ahead and vote for it. That was just him trying to get ahead of the story and trying to make it sound like he was on board the whole time, so he didn't have uh, as big of blowback when the Republicans turned on him. He was trying to look like a genius, and of course he's not. But he went ahead and he said, "Go ahead and vote for it." Well, they did. They voted on it 427 to 1 in the House, and they passed it within hours unanimously in the Senate. And Donald Trump was hoping it'd pass the House, it would hit the Senate, and it would stall there for a couple of months. He was hoping to buy himself some time that he could figure out a way out of this Epstein problem. He wants it to go away. Now, we are hearing that back in March, when they thought the Epstein files were going to be released way back then, that something like 3,000 hours of overtime was spent by the FBI going through the Epstein files, redacting names, redacting things. And we don't know what we're going to see here. But remember, these aren't the only copies. So if they do try to play too many games, people like Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene have said they would read the client names that they have been given by the victims on the House floor. Now, why on the House floor? Well, we've talked about it. That's covered by the speech and debate clause. And they can't be sued for anything that is said as part of speech and debate on the House floor. So they can say pretty much whatever they want. That is how Marjorie Taylor Greene got away with putting up pictures of Hunter Biden. That if anybody else had posted them out somewhere on the internet, it would have been considered revenge porn or something like that. And she gets away with it because she's on the House floor. She doesn't know the meaning of the word decorum, but the Republicans had turned on Donald Trump with this vote, and then they turned again on one to pass, or there's going to be a vote. I don't know if it has happened yet on this piece of legislation to restore collective bargaining and force Donald Trump and admit that the government must deal with federal unions, despite the fact that the courts have said that executive order basically is illegal. If by passing a law around it, it just reinforces it. And it is something that the Supreme Court and stuff would look at when the case finally gets there, if they even take it up. Now, the simple fact that they've had a couple of discharge petitions to go around Mike Johnson is telling. And I said they're working on another one. And one of the ones they are working on is the ACA subsidies. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But Donald Trump's party is turning on. Okay? That added stress is not boding well for somebody who is used to getting his way. He has pretty much his entire life been able to bully and push around and get his way no matter what he does. And when it comes to politics, for the most part, he has been able to bully his own party. And he says jump, they say how high, and they do whatever he says. But it's not working much anymore because they're realizing Donald Trump is a lame duck president. Okay? And we knew he was going to be a lame duck going into this term. Now, typically, lame duck means you can't run for election again, which is true. He cannot run for a third term. And so he can't run in 2028. So the Republicans are already looking at how do we move past him, right? And they're looking at 2026 and the midterms going, oh shit, this man could cost us the midterms. So on certain things, they haven't quite hit that point where they want to walk away from him completely, but they might. And I think they will, getting closer to the midterms. I don't know if that means they're going to impeach and remove him, or if they're just going to publicly start voting against him. They're already doing some of that. But if they impeach and remove him, they would probably use the Epstein files, and that is something that is hanging over Donald Trump's head. He doesn't want the files released. He doesn't want them to even look into it. He has always said there's nothing there. Why are we talking about that guy? There's nothing to see here. Some people are speculating that Donald Trump, it may come out that he was more than just a client. Some people are suggesting Donald Trump may have been more than just a client. He might have been, and it may come out through the Epstein files, that he was actually a partner. And it would kind of make sense, right? Because of Donald Trump and having owned the Miss Teen USA competition, that maybe that was a uh, recruiting area for potential victims. And we know Donald Trump has no problem walking in on underage girls changing. He talked about when he owned the Miss Teen USA competition, he said, well, that's one of the perks of being the owner, right? You can walk in on them while they're changing and nobody can say a word because you own the pageant. It's entirely possible that it may come out that he was one of the partners in this. And Donald Trump wouldn't survive politically being connected to Epstein in that way. I mean, if there's even one photo or one bit of evidence that connects Donald Trump to Epstein as being a client, it may be enough to take him down politically. But if he is connected as some kind of a partner, the Republicans will turn on him in mass, mostly because they want to get reelected. They know they have to go up against their own voters. Every member of the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate is up for reelection in under a year. And people are watching this case. Now, I've talked about it before. One of the reasons why Republicans may use the Epstein files as their vehicle to get rid of Donald Trump through impeachment and removal would be because they can do it potentially without losing a big chunk of that MAGA voting base. There is a section, about 30 to 35% of Republicans, that would not vote if the Republican Party turned against Donald Trump. However, this is also one of the most vocal groups that want the release of the Epstein files because they can't tolerate anything like that has happened to children. And they are convinced, though, that it is only going to be Democrats in those files. Well, when they come out and Donald Trump is in there, especially if they come out with anything saying Donald Trump has been, involved. Like supposedly there are images in there of Donald Trump sitting down with two underage teenage girls, topless, sitting on his lap. Okay, that is pretty damning. And if those images are out there, it may be enough for the Republicans to use it to move against Donald Trump, impeach and remove him, and move on to JD Vance. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If the Republicans right now, with them having control of the House of Representatives, if they pass an impeachment resolution, okay, and send it to the Senate, I 100% expect them to convict him in the Senate. Because the Republicans currently have the majority in the House of Representatives, I do not expect them to end up being able to or that they would not impeach him if they didn't already have the votes. I fully expect they've been having these conversations behind closed doors and that they are talking amongst themselves going, okay, do we do it this week? Do we wait a couple weeks? When is the best time? Is there enough damning things out there now, or do we wait and see if something else drops out of the Epstein files first, or do we see if he actually releases it or whatever? Now, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, is on the clock for releasing these files. She has about 20 days, I think, 23 days, something like that, to release it based on when it passed. It's hard to tell because this month it feels like it's been a year. Um, every month feels like it's been a year when it comes to Donald Trump, just because there's always so much going on that every day there's, enough to talk about that I can put up an hour podcast every day talking about all of the things going on. And I could probably do 2 hours some days because there's just that much shit. Well, with that being said, you know, with all of these things going on, Republicans are looking at what could happen. Now, Representative Al Green of Texas, a Democrat, has said Donald Trump would be impeached, or there will at least be articles of impeachment against him by the end of the year, brought up by Al Green. Now, I don't know that Republicans would back anything led by a Democrat, but maybe they would. And again, same situation. Even though it would only take two or three Republicans, if they back it, I think they're sending it to the Senate knowing they have a conviction. Now, if they convict Donald Trump, the penalties are removal from office and barring from ever holding future federal office. And I think they would do that. I think they would do both penalties. Now, I think you almost have to remove in order to do the second penalty of barring future use. But anyway, I mean, we've never successfully, that I'm aware of, impeached and removed anybody. We've come close with a couple of them. We've never removed a president. Um, Now, we came close with Nixon. And you might remember, if you're old enough or if you've read this in the history books, that apparently when everything happened with Watergate, that Nixon was offered a deal. Okay. Republicans in the House went to Nixon and said, hey, we've got the votes. You will be impeached. And we know we have the votes in the Senate to remove you. You'd better resign. And Nixon went, yeah, okay, I'm going to resign. He didn't want to become the first president to be successfully impeached and removed from office. Now, would Donald Trump take some kind of a deal like what Nixon got? I don't know. Part of me says no, that his ego wouldn't allow him to be to step down, but he's also a narcissist, and when backed into a corner, they back down. And if the Republicans turn to Donald Trump and say, "Hey, we've got you pinned dead to rights," um, we are going to end up removing you. You know, he may back down and say, "Okay, I'll do it for a pardon from JD Vance," but that pardon federally does not apply to any state level charges. He could still be facing problems in several states, and some of the cases are still ongoing against the fake electors and things from 2020 with the election. Like in Arizona, that case is still going on. The Georgia case is still going on, and the charges against Donald Trump, I believe, are still there. I just don't know if they are actively pursuing anything against Donald Trump right now. I don't think they dropped those charges. So even though he may get off on federal charges, there's still ways to go after him. But Donald Trump would think he's smart enough to figure out a way out of that. And, well, he would probably try to argue, well, I was pardoned federally. That should apply, even though it never has and never will. Um, he may end up trying it. That if they offer him the right deal, he may take it. Now, uh, Donald Trump is weak, and he is getting weaker by the day. And I was talking earlier about these ACA subsidies. Earlier this week, Donald Trump was supposed to unveil his health care plan, right? He was going to come out and it was going to be a 2-year extension of the ACA subsidies. They were going to have some income requirements again, trying to lower it to make it a little harder to qualify for the subsidies. Um, they also wanted to offer a chance to put it into some kind of a Trump savings plan, which is one of the ways they were able to sell him on it because he got something named after himself. And if it becomes popular, um, then he gets remembered, right? Donald Trump is worried, which is another reason we think his health is going, is he is worried so much about being remembered and doing things for legacy and things like that. Now, one of the things Republicans would say, and I've seen MAGA voters try to spin it, well, didn't they name Obamacare after Obama? No. The official name of the Obamacare Act is the Affordable Care Act. Now, there is a section of people out there who do not understand that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the exact same thing. So why do we call it Obamacare? Well, they were trying to pass it, spinning up against Barack Obama, Republicans were using it, trying to uh, give it a negative connotation, and oh well, it's just Obamacare, and there's going to be this, and there's going to be that, and it's going to be horrible. Well, people still think it's two separate things, and I've talked about it before, but I'll mention it again. I remember having a conversation with somebody. I don't remember who it was, um, but we were talking about the Affordable Care Act, and he called it Obamacare. Of course, he goes, "Well, I hate that Obamacare." I go, "Okay, let's break it down." And I go, "Well, do you think insurance companies should be able to uh, deny a child coverage for something that gets found out that they had since birth and say, well, it's a pre-existing condition, we're not going to pay?" He goes, "No, that's pretty good." He goes, they should have to pay on that." I go, "Okay. Do you think it's a bad thing that um, children can stay on their parents' plan until 26? You know, allowing college age students a chance to go to college, stay on their plan if they can't get a job in healthcare or a job that offers healthcare, I mean." And he goes, "Well," he goes, "Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I kind of like that." I go, "Okay." And I just went down the list of everything step by step. And everything I brought up, he went, "Yeah, I like that." Okay. So if he couldn't tell me what he didn't like about the Obamacare part, other than it was named after Obama. And that's where Republicans were able to win on that. They were able to message it well enough. And Donald Trump would love to have something in regards to Obamacare uh, renamed to him, which is why I've said if they put a provision in the whatever extension they do of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, if they do one, and just say, hey, we're going to call it Trump Care from now on, then he would probably vote to pass it. Why? Because Donald Trump ultimately is a narcissist and he worries about things being named after him and he wants positive connotation and all of that. And he wants a win. But he's not going to get many more of those wins. They are going to start losing. Now, Donald Trump backed off his plan. And I talked earlier that the Republicans are looking at potentially siding with all Democrats and using a discharge petition to bring up ACA subsidy vote. And they may do that. We're also hearing that after the resignation of Marjorie Taylor Greene, that, you know, she's just one crack in the dam, right? Well, we are hearing that Mike Johnson has been told by several members of his own party that if he tries to block or if they don't pass Affordable Care Act subsidies and they are allowed to expire, that there will be more resignations coming. So I think ultimately they are going to pass something. And I would expect it would be this bipartisan agreement that would grant 2-year extension of the ACA subsidies. Why 2 years? Well, because then it is covered for all of 26 and all of 2027, which gives lawmakers 2 years to figure out something and pass something to extend it through the 2028 election cycle, which means Republicans are at least thinking that they would not have to answer questions about the ACA subsidies during the midterm election run. Because we're coming up to primary season, right? First primary is about 4 months away. And if they're not going to support the ACA subsidies, et cetera, they're going to have a problem getting reelected. Now, if the Republican Party does turn on Donald Trump and they start mass resigning, you could see something that I don't know if it has ever happened before. The House of Representatives has been such a thin and narrow majority that it is entirely possible, depending on the timing of the resignations, that Democrats could regain control of the House. How? Well, let's look at it. There's 219 Republicans right now to 213 Democrats. Okay. That looks like a big margin. That's 6 seats. But that's pretty small in comparison. All things considered, there are 3 vacancies right now. Well, there is the special election in Tennessee. Okay. On Tuesday. We're talking 5 days from now. And according to polling, the Republican candidate is only leading the Democrat by 2 percentage points, which is within the margin of error in what was considered a safe Republican district. Okay, if that seat flips, and let's just say for the sake of argument that it does, that brings it up to 214 Democrats. Okay, you have a runoff election in Texas coming up, I believe, in January. Both candidates in that runoff are Democrats. Okay, Democrat guaranteed to pick up that seat. That brings us up to 215. Then you have the special election to fill Mickey Sherrill's seat in New Jersey. Also a safe Democratic district. Probably going to go blue. Okay, that brings us to 216 to 219. That's a 3-seat majority. 3. That is ridiculous. They could lose 2 votes and nothing would pass, right? And that is ridiculous. But then come January 5th, Marjorie Taylor Greene is resigning from Congress, and she has scoffed at the idea of revoking her resignation and staying to the end of her term. They've asked her, and she says, "Haven't I suffered enough?" Because the suffering she is talking about is the same thing she used to do to other people. The partisan attacks and calling her, Donald Trump has called her a traitor and called her Marjorie Taylor Brown and all of the vicious personal attacks that he has lobbed her way because she is standing up against him on the Epstein files mostly. And she keeps trying to come out more and more moderate. Now, a lot of people are thinking she is going to make a run for something statewide in Georgia, whether it's Senate, whether it is governor. She may try. I don't think she wins. I don't think she has redeemed herself far enough that happens. But that being said, she's looking at potentially doing something like that. Well, she resigns come January 5th. And again, for the sake of argument, her seat, her district is pretty safely Republican. But for the sake of argument, let's say her district flips blue. And if her district flips, it sends a warning signals across the Republican Party that the blue tsunami we've been talking about will happen in the midterms. But if we pick up those other 3 seats I talked about and the seat that Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to vacate, that puts it to 217 Democrats. It would take just one more Republican to pass away, resign, hell, switch parties, anything that would either turn that seat blue or leave it vacant where there's a special election where a Democrat could potentially pick up a seat. And if that happens, that would put the Democrats at 218, enough for a majority. and the way the House rules are written, I looked into it a little deeper. And Mike Johnson would not be out automatically as Speaker of the House. He would not, because there's no rule that says the Speaker has to be a member of the majority party. However, there is a rule for vacating the chair, and it would take like 6, 7, 8, I don't know. It's an under 10 number of members of the majority party to call for a vote to vacate the chair, and then all it takes is a majority of those present. Well, if the Democrats end up with 218 seats, they would have more than enough votes to vacate the chair, and they would also have more than enough votes to not only call for it, but to pass it. And Mike Johnson would be out as Speaker of the House, and they would get somebody else, presuming it is going to be Hakeem Jeffries. Now, Hakeem Jeffries has his own problems, but maybe that would change once if they have control of the chamber. And for him, it would be an audition, right? If he gets control of the House of Representatives sometime next year, and this is a long shot, but if it were to happen, he would be auditioning to keep his job going into the midterms, right? Now, if he doesn't get primaried, or if he doesn't lose to a primary challenger, he would be up for re-election next November. And if he becomes, typically when you have a Speaker of the House from either party, you know, the next time Congress reconvenes, if you're back in the majority, you go with that same Speaker again because they're the face of your party. So he had better, if he does gain control of Congress between here and there, and he is Speaker, he'd better be doing a lot of things right as far as being Speaker if he wants to hold on to it. And I hope that if he fucks things up too bad, that the Democrats would say, no, we're going to go with somebody else for leadership after this term. Don't even run. And maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I don't know. At one time, I had thought Hakeem Jeffries was going to make not only a good speaker, but he could have made potentially a decent presidential candidate. Now I'm not so sure with how he has handled a lot of things and how he has dealt with being minority leader. He has taken a lot of his cues from Nancy Pelosi. He's blocked certain people from doing certain jobs in favor of older established politicians. Same thing with supporting Mamdani in the election. He didn't come out endorsing Mamdani until, days before the election, because he knew if he didn't, he was probably not getting reelected at all. And it just shows weakness there. We don't need a weak speaker. We've seen what happens with a weak speaker. And, we just have to look at the tenure of both Kevin McCarthy and Mike Johnson. They are both fairly weak when it comes to being Speaker of the House. Now, if there are mass resignations, though, look for Democrats to be pushing to do pickups, okay? If they can pick up the House, it is easier. Even if they flip seats, right? It is automatically easier for them if they are incumbents to get re-elected, even in red districts, right? Being the incumbent gives yourself some advantages, especially when right now the tide is turning. The Donald Trump's poll numbers are some of the worst he's ever had. He's underwater, despite what he may tell you about his numbers. He's underwater on pretty much everything. And being connected to Donald Trump is going to be seen as a bad thing. So picking up the House is within reach. It could happen next year. Now, it's an outside chance, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying it's a foregone conclusion, but it would definitely be something that we need to keep our eyes on. Now, Donald Trump is going to be worried about losing the House of Representatives. Why? Because if they flip the House mid-session, right, Democrats are back in control, fully expect there to be articles of impeachment drawn up and passed because all it takes is a majority. And I think all Democrats would agree to go along with getting rid of Donald Trump. The question becomes, as we were talking about earlier, do the Republicans go along with it? And they may. And they may try to move on to J.D. Vance. Now, here's a story we haven't been talking about a lot lately, and that has been this story of J.D. Vance and Erica Kirk. There is speculation that there is more there than just friendship. Why? Well, several weeks ago, J.D. Vance was at an event held by Turning Point USA, the uh, group started by Erica Kirk's late husband, and she introduced him. He comes out on stage, and they share a hug on stage that looked way more than friendly. His hands were on her hips. She was running her fingers through the hair on the back of his head, which, I know I'm a bald guy. I don't know much about. But anyway, um, it looked way more than just a simple hug of a friend. I've got multiple female friends, multiple women that are my friends, and I've never hugged any of them like that, ever. And it would feel awkward if we did. But beyond that, there has been some speculation that apparently Usha Vance has been seen at least once or twice out in public not wearing her wedding ring, leading people to wonder if there's trouble between them. And it wouldn't surprise me if J.D. Vance ends up divorcing his wife, Usha Vance, uh, to move on to maybe Erica Kirk. Now, it's speculation, but it wouldn't surprise me because that would fit the MO. You know, Usha Vance had to feel very out of place at the RNC last year when they are announcing her husband to be the vice presidential candidate around signs and rally at a rally and where there are signs up all over the place talking about mass deportations, right? She would be one of the people that at least a segment of the MAGA base would not like, based on nothing more than where she's from. I believe, yeah, she is Indian, I believe, but um, I'm not 100% sure on that. Um, but she's from, that area of Asia. And uh, anyway, now there's speculation that he may move on to Erica Kirk. Okay, it's entirely possible. Well, Erica Kirk comes out and she has publicly said that when it comes to 2028, right now, she would endorse J.D. Vance. We are 3 years away from the election. Most of the time, you do not come out this early and announce you are going to run for election this early. Now, it makes sense for it to be J.D. Vance, though, right? With him being the heir apparent, he is the sitting vice president. Like, that makes sense. But that's different than, um, you know, anybody else coming out saying they're going to run. But the fact that she's already talking about potentially endorsing him, you add the weird hug, Usha Vance not wearing her ring. There's just so many things going on there that it wouldn't surprise me if something happens. Usha Vance ends up not being married to JD, and between here and 2028, JD ends up marrying Erica Kirk. She's got a connection to that conservative base that JD Vance would need to carry on, that deep MAGA base, that group that JD Vance really isn't liked with. He would shore up his image for the group of people that thought, running on a deport everybody strategy and have bought into all of the culture war bullshit would be a great strategy, right? Going to keep an eye on that one. I mean, I personally don't care necessarily if he decides that that's what he wants to do or that's what they're doing. Great, good for him. I don't care, right? But it just would show that they are. I think it would be more about political connections than it would be for anything, you know, romantic or um, just because that's the way he genuinely feels. It'd be political theater. Now, if I was in the position of Usha Vance and this came up, I'd be long gone. I'd say, yeah, you're on your own, buddy, and take him for anything and everything she could get in a messy divorce. But that's just me. We'll see how that plays out and if he does end up going forward. Now, one of the stories here I want to talk about, and I can't remember the guest's name, but Steve Bannon had a guest on his War Room podcast, okay? And they were talking about this Tina Peters in Colorado. She was that election worker who is being held on state level charges of tampering with elections and giving people that shouldn't have had access to voting machines and all of this from the 2020 election. Okay. And Donald Trump and the DOJ have been trying to force Colorado and have suggested that she ends up needing to be released, or not even released, transferred to federal custody. But she's got no federal charges. It would be highly unusual for a um, inmate to be held in federal custody with no federal charges, because then the federal system is the one paying the bill and footing the bill. When she has no federal charges, it's all state level stuff. But I think they want to get her out and try to make her some kind of a symbol for their movement. And so far, Colorado's saying, yeah, we're not moving her. She's in state custody. We're not dealing with overcrowding. We're fine. She's going to serve her sentence. Well, this guest on the Steve Bannon War Room podcast, which is a hell of a name for a podcast when they want to make it sound like the people on the left are the violent ones. Yet we've got this prominent political podcaster who's got his own show and he calls it the War Room. Really sends a message as to which side's the violent ones. But anyway, you got this War Room podcast, and this guest is on there, and I can't remember his name now, but it doesn't really matter. This guest though was suggesting that Donald Trump should send in the 101st Airborne to go in and basically do a military style raid of a Colorado prison and, get Tina Peters out. Advocating for Donald Trump to use the military for a jailbreak. Now that's completely ridiculous, and I don't even think Donald Trump is dumb enough to do that. And I would hope that if he tried to do this with the 101st Airborne or whatever unit he tried to send, that they would turn and look at him and say, no, sir, that is an unlawful order. We do not follow unlawful orders. Which goes right back to what we've been talking about the last several days when it comes to Senator Mark Kelly. Senator Mark Kelly is a retired vet. He was in the Navy. He was a naval officer. And he retired. Well, very decorated naval officer. And now he is in Congress. His wife was a representative, and she got shot very famously, and he ended up running to fill her seat when she resigned. Anyway, now she lived. Was it? I can't remember her name. Giffords, maybe. Anyway, he's a decorated officer. Now he was one of like 6 or 7 members of Congress that came out with a video. They're all vets, just reminding military members, military personnel of their oath, and that they do not have to follow illegal orders. Now, we've been hearing that members of the military are asking attorneys how they can refuse illegal orders, what constitutes an illegal order, etc. And it's on their mind, right? That they are worried about having to follow unlawful or illegal orders. So, what do what's going to happen? Well, the Pentagon is talking about recalling uh, Senator Kelly to active service because you can apparently, if you were an officer, they can do that. They can recall you for at some point, and they want to try to court-martial him on charges of sedition for going against the president of the United States. Problem is, if they were to do anything like that, the members of the court-martial, for lack of a better word, jury, uh, board, whatever term you use for it, are all going to be military personnel, all who have taken the exact same oath Mark Kelly was talking about in the video, and the one where he says you do not have to follow illegal orders. Now, effectively, the wording is something about you would follow all lawful orders, something like that. I don't know the exact wording of that oath. And even Donald Trump took to social media and he showed a plaque outside the Naval Academy. And on the plaque, it said something about we will follow all lawful orders or refuse unlawful orders. One of the two. It was phrased one of the two ways. I don't remember now. Doesn't matter entirely how it's phrased, but it proved Mark Kelly's point. It did not prove Donald Trump's point. And they want to try to make an example. And Senator Kelly's like, yeah, okay, go ahead and do it. I don't care. Bring me back. So we will see if the Pentagon ultimately does something, but this is just more intimidation. And this is just proving how desperate this administration is getting, trying to do any sort of a number of things to get people to bend to Donald Trump's will, and it's not working. All right, one of the last stories I want to talk about real quick is something came out, and apparently Donald Trump was talking about his ballroom project, where he was told it would be cheaper and quicker to build this ballroom if they tore down the East Wing than to build it and connect it and do it the way he initially said, which was to do it connecting, where all it would be like a walkway that would be connected to the East Wing. Well, when he found out it was going to be supposedly cheaper and quicker to tear down the East Wing to make room for the ballroom, he opted for that. But he knew it would take public backlash. Apparently, there was a conversation where he was talking with at least one person, and this has come out now that he suggested doing it under the cover of darkness. Can we do it at night? Because he knew there'd be public backlash. But he doesn't care about restoring or respecting or any sort of historical integrity for the people's house. It is not his piece of property that belongs to the American people. He is effectively a tenant living there rent free, and his lease is going to be up at some point between now and January 20th, 2029. But he doesn't care. This would be like me leasing out a piece of property to somebody coming in to find out they gutted the kitchen, right? With no intention of, and that they're just, that they're going to put in a whole new kitchen for me. And they did, but for right now, the kitchen's completely gutted and they're just using a couple of sawhorses with a plywood plank across it, and they're calling it a countertop. That's effectively what's going on here. Now, the question becomes what happens when Donald Trump is out of office? And what happens to the ballroom? And I think it's going to possibly depend on how far along the ballroom is. But at the rate they're going, this thing may not be done in time for Donald Trump to leave office in 2029. I think what they should probably do is rebuild the East Wing and just put in a slightly bigger ballroom than what was already there, because the ballroom that was there could hold about 200 people. Okay, 250, I think, something like that. Well, this 90,000 square foot ballroom that he is building, and from the plans we've seen so far, it looks like the whole area is going to be ballroom. Maybe some staging areas and stuff like that, but most of the 90,000 square feet is going to be part of the ballroom. Doesn't make any sense that it would only hold, and I'm hearing numbers between 650 and 999 people, just under 1,000. Doesn't make any sense that it would be that big and only hold that many people. But we will have to see what they ultimately do with it. I don't think it should stand. I think it should be torn down, and they should rebuild the East Wing. And if they wanted to make a bigger ballroom in the East Wing, or go through with his original plan and something connecting, they could maybe look into doing that. But we don't need this big gaudy ballroom and that Donald Trump just decided to do on a whim, where he didn't consult anybody. I think it needs to go. We need to restore the People's House back to the way it looked before Donald Trump. And if he had gone through the proper channels to get permission to do this and it was approved, I wouldn't have as big of an issue with it being done. But the fact that he just decided they were doing it, he had been talking about this ballroom. I thought for the longest time that it was never going to happen, because I didn't think the people that had to approve it were ever going to sign off on it. But he just decided to do it one day and move on. So that's where that stands. He wanted to do it under the cover of darkness because he knew there'd be public backlash, and he didn't want to deal with that level of public backlash. Okay, that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast today. I want to thank you for joining me. As I said earlier, this is the pre-Thanksgiving podcast. If you are driving and traveling or doing whatever you are doing for your Thanksgiving weekend, I hope you are safe. I hope you have fun with family and friends and whoever you choose to celebrate with. I will be back with a podcast tomorrow. Because there's always stuff to talk about. I could have probably gone for another hour if I wanted to with stuff today. So I've got plenty to talk about for tomorrow. I will be back. I hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving, and I hope you have a great weekend. And thank you for joining me.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.